And 3, 2, 1. Saquon Barkley is set to return in week 1, and he's already being drafted in the top 5 of Dynasty startups. But does he still have top 5 upside in his young career? That and more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, are you still taking Saquon in the top 5?
Why wouldn't we, to be quite honest? I can understand the push for, and this is mostly coming from a redraft perspective, right? I can understand the push for guys like Alvin Kamara. I mean, obviously CMC is still up there. Couple other running backs that I know like folks are hyped about, but to be quite honest, the buzz around Saquon Barkley and just like the Giants in general has been like fairly negative. So I understand like why folks might want to be off of them. But from a dynasty perspective, who really has that level of opportunity in front of them at the running back position? And that's really where I don't know why you would want to hang your hat on any sort of metric or any sort of opportunity in order to say that Saquon Barkley shouldn't be drafted there at that point, because we've known the Giants offense hasn't been good. They haven't been good since he was drafted to the Giants. I mean, at best, when Daniel Jones became a part of that offense and we were somewhat hyped about Jones and what he could be as a prospect, he was rushing around. He had like a couple of good quarterback weeks in his rookie season. But at best, they were 17th in the NFL in terms of offensive yards per drive. I think they've wound up falling back towards the back end of the league, like bottom 10 in terms of EPA per play. And over the entire span of Barkley being a part of the Giants, they are also bottom 10 in EPA per play. This has always been a bad situation, at least from an offensive standpoint, for Saquon Barkley. So, I mean, this rhetoric about Barkley not really being a top 5 option from a dynasty perspective, that's more of folks wanting to pin most of their fears on the Giants offense as a whole, which, okay, I can kind of get it because we all get caught up in the moment. I totally understand it. You get the Clapper and Jason Garrett coming in. They're drafting Kadarius Toney, who has had nothing but a roller coaster of an offseason. I 100% understand. But who other than Saquon Barkley and the other elite running backs in the league are going to be carrying the rock on 70, 80% of the time for their offense? Who else in the league is also on top of that rushing workload we just talked about is going to be rocking a 10, 11, 12% target share within that same offense? It's not going to be any of the guys that we want to push up, like Antonio Gibson, like Austin Eckler. They're just not going to see that same level of workload. And they're not also going to be able to capitalize on that workload because they don't have the same level of talent that Saquon Barkley has. So for me, I will still continue to draft Barkley like where he's going in drafts because he has the talent, he has the opportunity in the situation in order to capitalize on all of it. And so even if you are scared about the Giants as a team, what else like can you really say that's going to keep Saquon back when he succeeded despite all of that for multiple years?
It only took all offseason for us to aggressively disagree on something because I will not take him anywhere near 5. And I guess I'll say contract so everybody can drink. So he's got 2 more years under contract. So they'll pick up his 5th-year option next year. I'm fairly certain, of course. He might not have shown enough in his injury-riddled season past year to get the, position changing money, and we know how the running back contract disputes have been going of late, so that could be hairy, but that's not really the main issue. The main issue I think is just with the running back position as a whole. Dalvin Cook's still going in the top 5. I don't want him there. Alvin Kamara is going right behind Saquon Barkley. I don't want him there as much as I love Alvin Kamara, so I don't want Saquon at 5. The problem with that is that there's no room for these players, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, DK Metcalf, who should all be top 5 players if they're, if their career keeps ascending in the way that it has been. How do they fit if you just keep these running backs there? So really, I'd prefer those elite wide receivers for the next 6-7 years over the running backs that can change on a dime. You gave a lot of reasons that I don't even need to resubmit for why you should be wary of Saquon Barkley. And I think the one thing you didn't hit on is just that they're not sure about Daniel Jones. And that's going to become a problem here soon because you have a very short window at the running back position, mostly 5 years. If you drafted a first round running back, they're usually going to be great for 5 years, and then they might go to a second team, and you don't know how that second team's going to translate. Sometimes it ends up, actually, oftentimes you end up going to a timeshare and sharing with somebody on your second team after being the workhorse that he has been. So right now we're buying Saquon after an injury that he's going to start the season on like a very minute pitch count. I mean, he even mentioned, I don't know if I'll get a touch or if I'll get a series, but I'll be ready. Well, that means that they've had discussion that he's going to get a touch or a series. We don't know how many weeks that's going to be, and this is Dynasty. However, I feel like, why are you paying top dollar on somebody who you have so many question marks about? We don't know if he's going to come back fully healthy from the injury. We don't know if he's rushing back, because all offseason I was kind of glad that they were going to miss 2 to 3 weeks with Saquon. I'm like, yes, he has a whole Barry Sanders-like career ahead of him potentially. Don't rush him back right now. And then now he's going to all of a sudden be here week 1, and his first contact was like 2 days ago. So he had his first contact and said he feels good, even though he's still wearing like a little foam brace underneath his knee. Then he's going to go play a real NFL football game. And what does it matter if he could tear up his stuff on that one touch? You know what I mean? If he can only carry one touch in a game, why is he going in the game? Why don't you get that situated at practice when there's not guys trying to rip his knee off? So I don't like the whole organizational situation around him. And I am so excited about these wide receivers coming up, not to mention still your Tyreek Hill, your Devontae Adams, those guys that are going to descend, of course, but we have a whole crop of wide receivers coming up right behind him in A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Justin Jefferson. So I'd rather keep a wide receiver in that top 5 range. I think that the only player that you can really keep in the top 5 is Christian McCaffrey. And we can have, next year we'll have that argument. This year, people are so adamant about taking Christian McCaffrey in the first round, like first overall. I don't think I could do that either, to be quite honest with you, but you'd have to be able to trade back because the value is Christian McCaffrey at 1 overall. So yeah, I guess you take Christian McCaffrey at 1 overall because of value. But if you look at it over time, we really should have wide receivers in those 2 through 5 spots. And we just don't, because we get so excited about the running backs. But then in 2 years, it's going to be a full turnover at running back. And we're going to say, why? I wish that I had DK Metcalf, or I wish I had AJ Brown. But the best thing about it is that you can trade back in your startup draft. So you don't necessarily have to agree with me and not take Saquon Barkley or any other running back at 5. You can just trade back and get one of those wide receivers that's going to last you those 5-6 years of high quality production.
Right. And I think if anything, if folks have been at least monitoring like what the classes are doing like over the last like couple of seasons, then we should have been moving for a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who, if he isn't already, should probably be like the running back 1 from a dynasty perspective. But at least
he's actually in the top 5 as well. He's going 2 overall.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, but I do agree with your argument, though, that if you are considering a wide receiver like versus a running back like in a startup draft, 100% agree. I do think that from an opportunity cost standpoint, going with the wide receiver there. So if you are looking at a DK, an AJ, somebody around that range, then of course, like I would probably go that way. That's just my personal preference. But at the same time, it is difficult for me to square any of the guys that are currently going around him just at the running back position and what that opportunity is going to look like. And I guess I would say that the one kudos I would give to the Giants is their approach to this entire injury situation, because look at how the Giants have approached Saquon Barkley, like essentially like they're the head of their franchise, the face of their franchise, because it's not Daniel Jones for sure. So the way that they've approached like his injury situation that he suffered in, what was that, week 2 of last season, and how cautious they've been in bringing him back and ramping his workload up and making sure that he can do the things that he needs to do from an athletic standpoint in order to take the field, hopefully here in just 6 or 7 days.
Sure.
Compare that to what the Cincinnati Bengals have done, like my Bengals have done with Joe Burrow, where it's just been almost like, sunshine and roses.
Mini
Joe
camp
Burrow's
out there for mini camp.
Yeah, Joe Burrow's going to be here. They're showing clips of him, like out on the sled, like in the weight room, like just the entire offseason, where it's just like, no, like one, Burrow's injury was sustained like later in the season.
Mm-hmm.
From a quarterback standpoint, since he was like, at least at the very least semi-mobile, and we're counting on that to be as part of the reason why he can at least be able to function behind that offensive line. I mean, there's just so many things that's just, why are we now, like, why the Bengals were so rosy and optimistic about his, where the Giants, they took a step back and was like, wait, hold on a minute. Let's look at this. Let's be objective about it. And we'll slowly ease our most valuable player back into work. So I guess I would say that I guess I'm not as worried about Barkley, just for the fact that they have given him as much time as he needs. I know this is subjective, but from the videos that we've seen, it looks like he's ready to roll. But it's just, let's see like what he does. Like once they get the full pads on, he's taking contact, so on and so forth. But again, from a dynasty perspective, I do still think he belongs at least in the top 5 of his positional ADP because of the workload. Because of the workload that we know that he can handle. Even if his contract like is up in a couple of years, like you mentioned, I can't see that. Of course, like look at Dave Gettleman. Like if you want to take like football guy and put it in the dictionary, Gettleman's like picture will be right next to it. So I do think that there's enough value there for him to be at least a worthwhile asset for the next few seasons.
But the problem is that his contract's going to expire at around the same time as Daniel Jones. So it's not that I still believe, for the people who, I always get the negative comments in the chat because people get mad at me for not being all sunshine and roses about all their favorite players. Like, Saquon Barkley is the most talented running back in the league. That's not the issue here. There are so many things that go around picking a player in the top 5 in Dynasty that is honestly, the player's talent is just one of like 20 things that matter.
Sure.
And one problem is that if you're not sold on Daniel Jones, how do you pay a running back the top dollar that he deserves at the same time as trying to figure out your quarterback situation? So you're telling me that you took a running back at 4, couldn't figure out the quarterback situation during his whole contract. He got hurt during the contract, and then you're going to pay him top dollar and do it again. You're just going to run it back. Like, you're going to take Saquon Barkley again and waste his talent again. Probably not going to happen. So then he's going to go to a second team. We're not really sure what's going to happen there. So you got the bad offensive line, bad quarterback, bad organization, and an amazing running back. Okay, well, let me take a wide receiver that I'm going to be extremely excited about and not a running back that I have to say, I don't know, every week.
Yeah.
So if you guys are listening in, you know that we're coming from the email list from Joe Bryant, and it also comes from Cecil Lammy and Sigmund Bloom. They give you the news and notes from around the league every week into your email inbox, and then we take information from that email list and we parse through it, figure out what's relevant for Dynasty, and we give it to you. So if you like the show, go over to footballguys.com, subscribe to the email listing, and you will be up to date on everything throughout the season. You know, there's going to be a lot of injuries. There's going to be a lot of big games. There's going to be a lot of everything, a lot of COVID that you're going to have to actually be very aware of. Actually, I would argue that that's going to be the most valuable purpose, is figuring out who's on the COVID-19 list this week so you don't accidentally start somebody who isn't actually available. So definitely go to footballguys.com, subscribe to the email list. Sticking with the Giants, Chris, we've talked so negatively about Kadarius Toney even before all of the nonsense started with the Giants. We were taking Amon-Ra St. Brown ahead of them. Probably still would, but we do have something technically positive. Kadarius Toney turning the corner in reference to his recovery from an offseason hamstring injury, according to Dan Duggan of The Athletic. I want to start with this because the reason I wanted to talk about it is because there is a world where everything was fluff except for Kadarius Toney's hamstring injury. I can look back and say the contract dispute could have happened with anybody. You know, let the guy get his money right. It could have had nothing to do with Kadarius Toney's character. There was a problem with a shoe at one point. Like, did that need reported? And a guy mispracticed that was actually they said that it was excused. So if you really look at all of them one by one, it could just be a string of bad luck and then a hamstring injury. And if that's the case, Kadarius Toney is massively cheap, like cheaper than when we didn't want to take him.
Right. I don't know if that's the case though. It's difficult for me to square everything that's happened during the off season along with, and maybe this is just what is it? What's the term? Take lock, right?
Sure.
If you have so much information that you've been storing over a certain period of time, how do you adjust for that? And honestly, at this point, the only way that I can see myself adjusting is once I see it on the field. How? Because we haven't
But
seen
then
him.
it's too late.
I know it's too late, and I guess if I get burned by Kadarius Toney, then man, so be it. If I get burned by the wide receiver, or at least not even the wide receiver, let's say the pass catcher, 3 or 4 on an offense that's tied to Jason Garrett, then I'll take that L. I mean, I will 100% take that L for sure. But if we go back to his offseason, of course, he did have the injury earlier, but I guess the one bright side to that is, isn't he one of the only pass catchers that's currently healthy? I mean, Kenny Galladay coming back from injury. He hadn't practiced in essentially a month. Mm-hmm. Darius Slayton also nursing an injury like shortly after their preseason games. Evan Ingram also with a calf injury, if I'm remembering correctly. He, while likely to go, could also potentially miss their season opener. So it's just Sterling Shepard, Kadarius Toney, possibly Saquon Barkley. So it's just, I think the opportunity kind of opens itself up to Toney being a part of that offense, and we'll see how he gets deployed. And that's the thing I want to see, because I want to see him move past the moniker of being a manufactured touch gadgety type of role player from college to what is Jason Garrett going to do for him in year one? Like what's Joe Judge and Jason Garrett going to do for Kadarius Toney? If they move him into a standard either slot role, like that sort of thing, okay, fine. You've got me. I'm 100% sold, or at the very least, let's say 75% sold on Toney and what he can possibly do. But if it's this, trying to bring him in and manufacture touches and just pulling him off the field in these certain situations, then I can't buy into his role within that particular offense. So that's where I think at this point during the offseason, without seeing anything in the preseason, it's so difficult for me to buy into like what he could possibly be for that offense in year one.
Well, the problem with the pick in general is just that their only healthy wide receiver is Sterling Shepard, who is also their longest tenured receiver and is also a slot player.
Right.
So you can't really. I want to say that there is a scenario where after week one, the craziest thing that we saw on Sunday was that Kadarius Toney had like 5 manufactured touches and like 6 targets. It's like, oh, maybe they do actually like the guy that they took 20th overall. Because if you read all the reports all year, you would think that they would take that pick back in a heartbeat. But we're not at camp. We're not. They could be. I mean, if he weren't hurt, I would like to think that he would have had an Elijah Moore type off season where it's like, oh my goodness, this guy is incredible.
Right.
But we don't know because he was hurt. He had the contract issue, et cetera, et cetera. There were a lot of different issues, but we've all been there when a lot of things stack up and nobody really knows the whole story because it just you just kept digging yourself further. And that seems like what it might be with Kadarius Toney. I mean, he has not had a good start to his NFL career, but in Dynasty, if you were ever going to take him, I mean, he was already like the 206 in startups, a super flex, of course, then he's probably even cheaper now. Like I kind of jokingly said we were taking Amon-Ra St. Brown ahead of him and probably still would, but a lot of people still would. And technically the 4th round hit rate is abysmal compared to the 1st round hit rate for wide receiver.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to just flip those guys right now, you go ahead. I mean, the ceiling is certainly higher for Kadarius Toney than it is for Amon-Ra St. Brown or Amari Rodgers. That doesn't mean that he's the safer guy, even though he is because he was a 1st round pick, but we don't think that he should have been a 1st round pick. The Giants think he should have been a 1st round pick. Okay, and apparently the Jaguars, sorry.
And just Urban Meyer, not the Jaguars, just Urban Meyer.
Yes, Urban Meyers. So you mentioned take lock earlier. We're still kind of in the take lock because we did hard work to get to an evaluation, and he hasn't been able to prove our evaluation wrong. But I'm saying that he's technically gotten even cheaper to acquire. So you can still keep your take and say, look, this is just, it's gone too far. This is too cheap for top 20 NFL pick. And you could go acquire Kadarius Toney before you see him on Sunday, because on Sunday, like I said, if he gets 5 manufactured touches, it won't be out of the slot very much, just because they put themselves between a rock and a hard place with Sterling Shepard. He's under contract for a while, longest tenured receiver. They love him. How are you going to get Kadarius Toney there? But he will make it on the field probably more than we think.
Right. And I think that's the part that we need to square away at this point. It's that all of the narratives that we've stored for however many months, you now have to balance that with the fact that he's going to get opportunity. I mean, at worst, with the current pass catchers currently being hurt, and we just talked about the uncertainty surrounding Saquon Barkley, there's a path for Kadarius Toney to at least be on the field. Right. Whether he commands targets and whatever he does with those targets afterwards, is that story is still yet to be written. Right. But at the very least, we know that he is going to be the one out there on the field for the most part. So we have to square that. Like, we have to reconcile those two things, like an off season of injuries, personal reasons for missing camp, like a shoe issue, all those other things. Now squaring that with the fact that he's actually going to be on the field with the starting offense for games and producing from a fantasy sense, should he get those targets. So that's where I do agree with you that with the first round draft capital that he received, the fact that he's also going to be on the field, also the fact that most likely, given all of the offseason narratives, he probably is going to be the cheapest that he's ever going to be, because the moment he starts catching passes, the moment he starts producing from a fantasy sense, that price is going to tick up. So it's just, why not, at least from a pure strategy perspective, remove the names, remove the team names, remove the jerseys, remove all of that. Why not, from a pure strategy perspective, you throw, I don't know, like you throw maybe a future pick, maybe a back end of the roster player, or somebody that would be, let's say, of equivalent value that you think for right now to the guy that drafted Toney, to see what you can get for him at this point. At least from a strategy perspective, it makes sense to me.
Sure. And I've been thinking about something a lot I wanted to throw in every time we talk about Kadarius Toney, and I never get around to it. But if Kadarius Toney was drafted where he was supposed to be drafted, like in the second round by someone like Seattle or the Chiefs, he's a dynasty darling right now, because he was a fun player to watch. It's just that it was a massive reach by a terrible organization. So, you just have to, there's mental gymnastics that you have to play, but you can acquire this player for cheap, and in the long run, you could look very smart. Probably won't be me, but I do think it is a good idea. So if you haven't checked out the Football Guys website for starters, please go check that out. It looks absolutely incredible. If you've been subscribing for years and you just haven't got around to re-upping your subscription to check it out this year, go check it out. It's been completely revamped. You see all of your videos, your podcasts right there up front. So it's extremely easy to navigate. But sometimes you want to get content on your phone for the same, footballguys.com. Well, you can go download the Football Guys mobile app and get a lot of your content there. I know that a lot of people's drafts are over, but not everybody's. In fact, Chris is drafting tonight, and he'd be able to use the Football Guys mobile app to help with his draft tonight. Yep. So it's definitely not too late to go get the Football Guys mobile app, and it'll help you through the season too. So don't think that, oh no, I already drafted. You still want to go get that Football Guys mobile app on iOS or Android. So Chris, you guys talked about something last week when I wasn't here, Irv Smith's injury. It was quite a bit more optimistic when you got to discuss it, and unfortunately, I'm the one that has to be the bearer of bad news. So updating a previous report, Irv Smith is out 4 to 5 months with a meniscus injury. That's pretty much the whole season unless they make it deep into the playoffs. What does this do to Irv Smith to you in Dynasty?
It does drop him down, unfortunately, for me, because we looked at Irv Smith as kind of the guy that should ascend, given the fact that Kyle Rudolph has left the team, and now he's also with the Clapper, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, so that's kind of funny. But either way, we thought that Rudolph leaving gives more room for Irv Smith to, I guess, at the very least, run more routes, and at the very least, also get more targets or earn more targets from that offense, despite the fact that Mike Zimmer came out during the offseason saying that he thought his role was going to his being Smith's fairly, for the most part.
I didn't buy that.
I didn't really buy it, but of course that set most of the alarm bells for the fantasy community. So, okay, I understand that, but still, it's hard for us to square missing yet another season They've got Tyler Conklin. They trade for, they bring in like Chris Herndon, regardless of what you think about it, what type of role does Chris Herndon like provide to that offense? He's not out there blocking. He's not a blocking tight end.
Unfortunately, he wasn't receiving either. That's why he got the boot.
But he's out there running routes. He's providing the same role that we wanted Irv Smith to fulfill. So it's hard for me to now continue to, I mean, if you've got him on your roster, obviously you're more likely stuck with him. Okay, fine. But do we see a path for him continuing to move up in the tight end ranks in Dynasty? And I just don't see that path for him at this point. Like, there's another year removed. We don't even know what that quarterback situation is going to look like in Minnesota here within the next couple of years with the contract for Kirk Cousins coming up here soon. At least they have an out within the next couple of seasons. So what is that offense going to look like? As concentrated as it is, what is that offense going to look like now, giving opportunity to both Tyler Conklin and a pass-catching tight end like Chris Herndon to, I guess, revamp his particular career? So I don't know, man. It's difficult for me to square it.
Irv Smith is like right underneath the cusp of having like insulated dynasty value. So
yeah,
a player that I was thinking about is like, so if Noah Fant goes down, his ceiling is the moon in my opinion, in the NFL's opinion, metrics, everything going for Noah Fant except for unfortunately health and quarterback play. But I feel like his dynasty value has been insulated. Sure. If he were to go down with the same season-ending injury, people still want to roster Noah Fant. I feel like Irv Smith's value was just underneath that to where he didn't quite reach that insulated value, and now it is going to drop and people are going to forget about Irv Smith, and it's going to have to be one of those type of things where next year he pops off and people say, oh yeah, Irv Smith. Oh yeah, I forgot I had Irv Smith on my IR. Let me upgrade him.
Yeah.
So he wasn't quite there to where you could actually trade like for instance, Cam Akers. I mean, you can still trade him for something if you don't think that he's going to come back to full strength. You can't necessarily trade Irv Smith to anything. So unfortunately, he's getting relegated to your IR, and he's probably just going to sit there for a while. Absolutely do not sell low. He does have a very high ceiling. We just haven't been able to see it yet. And Tyler Conklin wasn't going to keep him off the field very long. I don't care how much if they liked Tyler Conklin, he would have been more involved already. I mean, Kyle Rudolph wasn't keeping Tyler Conklin or, in fact, Irv Smith off the field towards the end of the season. So it's not the type of thing where Tyler Conklin was going to get like a 50-50 share of tight end targets in the offense. That wasn't going to happen. They could say that all they want, but I think Irv Smith would have put that to bed quite quickly. So stash him. If somebody puts him on their trade bait, definitely go shoot him an offer, because he is somebody who's very young. I think only 23 or 24. He'll be around for a long time. But sticking with tight end, somebody else who's going to be around for a long time and also very rich, Mark Andrews signs a 4-year, $56 million contract extension, according to Ian Rappaport of NFL Network. And that makes him the highest paid tight end ever. So what's that do to Mark Andrews in Dynasty, Chris?
I think it just stabilizes his value at this point. What are we really trying to move him? I mean, Kyle Pitts still sits atop most of the ranks.
I knew we had to talk about Kyle Pitts.
Well, I mean, all love to Sigmund. I hope your family's doing well, Sig. But Travis Kelce probably sits atop the ranks, or Kyle Pitts, 1, 2, whatever. Darren Waller, George Kittle. I mean, Mark Andrews fits somewhere in that nebulous of the high-end tight ends. But even if you're not sold on the contract situation, stabilizing him, 2 years ago, 7th in red zone targets across all tight ends. The year after that, 5th in red zone targets. Last year, he took a step back, obviously, because the entire offense took a step back. But we know what Mark Andrews provides to Lamar Jackson. We know what he can do on the field, not just from a red zone perspective, but also where he can be used for between the 20s as well. So for my money, it looks like if you are still high on the entire Baltimore passing offense with the additions of Rashad Bateman and so on and so forth, at least from a dynasty perspective, right? Because Bateman's going to be out at least for the next month or two. I still think that Mark Andrews should be considered at least within the top 5, top 6 at the position.
This is another situation where I wish, speaking of Sigmund, we could just take this conversation on the couch, because think about the fact that an NFL organization paid a tight end the most amount of money ever for a tight end, and he runs what 50% of the snaps.
Yeah.
That's because Nick Boyle might be the best blocking tight end in the NFL. That's all he does. He's basically a right tackle, but he's probably the best blocking tight end in the NFL. And the Ravens were able to identify how important Mark Andrews was to his team while only playing 50% of the snaps, and his snap share is not going to go up. They like what they're doing. It's working. Nick Boyle's in there as a blocker. Mark Andrews is in there as a receiver. Doesn't matter if other NFL organizations know it. Like you said, the red zone target share is insane because the Ravens know what they're going to do with Mark Andrews. Other teams know what they're going to do with Mark Andrews. Lamar Jackson still finds Mark Andrews in the end zone. And I don't know what else that we need to do to elevate Mark Andrews into, at least don't put him in a separate tier of Kelsey, Kittle, and Pitts, because they traded Hayden Hurst, who they drafted in the first round, which was terrible. I mean, he shouldn't have even been drafted ahead of Andrews, let alone 2 rounds ahead of Andrews. And that's not a hindsight thing. Okay. Don't give me that. Like that night, I could have had the same conversation with you. So, but they were able to, get value back for Hayden Hurst because they trusted Mark Andrews. And then they got another season of Mark Andrews, 50%-ish snap share. And then they paid him huge money. So it doesn't matter that he's not on the field for 100% of the snaps, because when he is on the field, he's the focal point of the offense. And I don't know how much Rashad Bateman's going to matter towards that, but apparently not enough, because they drafted Rashad Bateman in the first round and then still extended Mark Andrews. And yes, Rashad Bateman's hurt for the first few games of the year, at least 4, but they've seen him in practice. So if Rashad Bateman was going to really eat into Mark Andrews too terribly much, they wouldn't have been extending Mark Andrews for the most money that a tight end's ever gotten. So I think that this elevates Andrews into that top 4 conversation, and it's a tier of its own. And if you're in a draft and you don't want to pay premium for Kyle Pitts or George Kittle or Travis Kelce, take the discount, and it might not even be much of a production discount when it's all said and done. I mean, we might see Mark Andrews producing similarly to those guys. We're all about value here, so that's where I would find my value.
Yeah, I think the problem that most folks are always going to have when it comes to reconciling Andrew's value is the target share, right? Because if you look at Travis Kelce, essentially has like a wide receiver one, almost like, a Diggsian like type of, like 25%, something like that. Darren Waller, even higher, almost like DeAndre Hopkins, 28, 29%. And then George Kittle, when he's healthy and when it's just him, also wide receiver one level of target share. So it's just, if you're looking at targets and consistency, even though consistency is like one of those things that's been like somewhat debunked in terms of its relative value, like for fantasy purposes, still for folks that rely on that sort of thing, it's difficult to square putting Mark Andrews with those other guys, because we know those other guys are going to be getting 7, 8, 9, 10 targets per week, where Mark Andrews might be getting 4, 5, 6, 7. But we know those 4, 5, 6, 7 targets for Mark Andrews are going to be those high value touches, are going to lead to a touchdown, which we all know we need for a tight end. So it's just, I agree, but I think that's one of the things that most folks will have a tough time squaring when it comes to looking at Mark Andrews versus the other elites that are in front of him.
Sure. So everybody that's listening to the Dynasty Newsletter, we appreciate it so much. This has been our first off season with the show at Footballguys, and it's been tremendous. And if you're here, that means you've probably seen the other shows. In fact, Chad Parsons filled in for me last week when I was on vacation. Much appreciated, Chad. And then he does a show, the Dynasty Show, with Jordan McNamara, who Chris and I have podcasted with multiple times. And I tell you what, before I got the job here at Footballguys, I was already a listener to the Dynasty Show, footballguys.com. So if you found your way here first, please go back there, please, because we're telling you the news and notes, and that's what we're constrained to. That's what we're going to talk to you about. We're talking about value changes. We're talking about, this is, you need to change for Kadarius Toney now if you're going to trade for him, that type of thing. Over there, they're talking about, philosophical things. They're talking about how to capitalize on value, how to work on your waiver wire in season.
Oh, yes.
This transition to redraft that we're about to do, it doesn't technically transition to redraft. You still need to keep your eye on years away from now, but you also need to win your season. That's the type of thing that they're going to talk about over there at the Dynasty Show. So please like, subscribe, rate, review over here, but also go over there and check that out. Hit the notification bell so you know when all of us are going live. Speaking of looking years in the future, Chris, I think that this last thing might be a little bit of just a stash, and this might be my new Kendrick Bourne is what this might be. So Tyron Johnson signed with Jacksonville, according to Tom Pelissero, NFL Network. Tyron Johnson, I feel like, outproduced Jalen Guyton significantly. And the first thing you said is that means that they like Josh Palmer, and I think they do like Josh Palmer. I think Josh Palmer has done enough to show the Chargers that he was a valuable pick. But Guyton was there to be released, and when it was just Guyton and just Tyron Johnson last year, the reason I remember that is because I played way too much Showdown over on DraftKings, and you had to pick one or the other. And actually, both of them, I think Guyton had a long touchdown, and then Tyron Johnson kind of produced the one. I felt like Tyron Johnson was the guy that was going to last, so much so that I was taking him late in best ball this year. And they dropped him. I don't know what happened in the background. There might have been some red flags in the background that we'll never know about, but it seemed to me that Jalen Guyton was the clear cut, and he did not get cut. Jalen Guyton's still with the Chargers. Tyron Johnson finds his way to Jacksonville, but that is an ascending offense. Now, hopefully Urban Meyer doesn't get in the way of that, but you have very talented at the top end with Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, DJ Chark, and now you add Trevor Lawrence. And then after that, there's not a lot at wide receiver for the Jaguars. So we might see Tyron Johnson actually finding himself in a better situation, a situation where he actually sees the field early and often. Is this a stash you're willing to make in Dynasty?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't see why we wouldn't try and look at Tyron Johnson from a Dynasty perspective, even if he isn't going to provide us immediate value. Because if you look at his measurables, when he was coming out of college, he was one of the guys that, while we didn't think he didn't scream alpha or anything like that, but he did scream a guy that could have at least that wide receiver 3 flex to add some punch to your roster.
Right.
4.4 40 time coming out of college. And even if you look at his production, while he might have profiled as a deep threat, he was actually one of the more efficient wide receivers on the Chargers. Hopping over to PFF, looking at their yards per route run metric that they use, Tyron Johnson is at the top of the list for all the wide receivers that were in Los Angeles last year. He was more efficient on the routes that he ran than Keenan Allen, than Mike Williams, way more than Jalen Guyton. So I was actually really surprised when the Chargers got rid of Tyron Johnson, but I think his fit in Jacksonville makes the most sense because look at who they have currently on the roster from a deep threat perspective. DJ Chark, who's been, dragged through the mud by Urban Meyer throughout most of the offseason. Marvin Jones, a 31-year-old wide receiver. So it's just from a looking out into the future, who do they really expect to, one, still be on that roster, or two, still be on that roster and be able to perform in that same role that they know that Trevor Lawrence can excel at, that they know they'll still need a guy in order to take the top off of defense and pull some of that attention away from a guy that, like Laviska Shenault, running some of those underneath routes, like Travis Etienne out of the backfield once they get him back next season. So Tyron Johnson, I think from a role player perspective, fits perfectly into what they'll need. It's just that right now they just happen to have two guys in front of them in Chark, at least Chark and Jones, that can do it. So I think Tyron Johnson is the perfect waiver wire or stash that you can make at the back end of your roster.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today. Thank you for joining us for the Dynasty Newsletter. Again, I'm your host, Adam Wilde. You can find me at APWILDE. That's my co-host, Chris Allen. You can find him at Chris Allen FFWX. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, and hit that notification bell so you can see next time we're going live.
Peace.